Today, Kat and I will be exploring the psychological themes in the classic Hitchcock thriller, Psycho, or as Freud likes to call it, psychoanalysis.
The movie begins when we are introduced to Marion Crane and Sam Loomis. Marion takes off with $40,000 to bail Sam out of debt. Marion ends up at the Bates Motel where she meets Norman Bates and eats dinner with him after overhearing an argument between Norman and his mother. After dinner, Norman spies on Marion but leaves shortly before Marion gets in the shower. Just when you're least expecting it, Marion is murdered and was perhaps the most iconic shower scene of all time. Norman discovers what has happened and quickly gets rid of all evidence. Arbogast, a private detective hired by Marion's boss, tracks Marion to the Bates Motel where he meets the same demise as Marion. Lila and Sam learn that Norman Bates' mother Norma died 10 years ago. Then, to avoid suspicion, Norman carries his mother from the attic to the basement. Taking matters in their own hands, Lila investigates Norman's house while Sam distracts him. In the plot twist of the century, Lila discovers the corpse of Mrs. Bates. Then suddenly the knife killer appears. But thankfully Sam saves the day and reveals that the stab-happy woman has been Norman all along. Later, a psychiatrist explains that Norman killed his mother, then assumed her corpse, and took on her entire identity, who just happened to be a murderer. The film ends after Norman grins at the camera while a flicker of his mother's skull is superimposed on his face.
We are diagnosing Norman Bates with a dissociative disorder, specifically dissociative identity disorder. These types of disorders are strongly connected to past experiences of trauma. The symptoms for DID are defined by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual as the existence of two or more distinct identities, ongoing gaps in memory, and significant distress or behavior that inhibits normal functioning. Norman meets all of said criteria. His second identity, who we call Mother, materialized after enduring severe abuse as a child and killing his own mother. With this information, we now know that when Marion first arrived, the woman she saw in the window and Norman are the same people with two separate identities. An experience of memory loss is evidenced in the scene after Marion's murder. Norman's shock after discovering Marion suggests that he forgot that he physically killed her. Norman also thinks his mother is still alive. This is a delusion or a false belief based on an incorrect perception of reality. We couldn't find a symptom Norman doesn't appear to have. However, not every person with DID has this extreme of a condition. In fact, there is no direct link between criminal activity and this disorder, but when it does happen, it makes an impression and garners a lot of publicity. At the end of the film, the psychiatrist mentions Mother took over Norman entirely, meaning he no longer has multiple identities and cannot be treated as one with DID typically would. Regardless, his psychological state is strongly related to past trauma and thought discrepancies. Intense psychodynamic therapy could be useful in revealing his unconscious conflict and repressed memories, while cognitive therapy, hypnosis, and antipsychotic medications can target thought discrepancies and delusions. Norman has potential for improvement, however, given his setting and extraordinary condition, his prognosis is poor. Of course, we can't talk about psychology and Hitchcock without talking about Freud. Contrary to popular belief, the title psycho is actually an allusion to psychosis, a term originally coined by Freud, meaning a condition where one loses touch with reality and allows the ego to be carried away by the id. This brings us to Freud's topographical model, beautifully represented as Norman's house. The second floor is the superego, the ground floor is the ego, and the basement is the id. Throughout most of the movie, Mother lived in the superego, imposing strict standards of conflict onto Norman and occasionally becoming his alter ego. After physically moving Mother to the id, she takes over his ego entirely, thus causing Norman to experience complete psychosis. Finally, Freudian psychosexual theories indicate that Norman was sexually attracted to his mother and developed an Oedipus complex, which caused him to kill his mother and her boyfriend out of jealousy. While Hitchcock managed to accurately and seriously portray the symptoms of DID, his depictions of Norman's alternate identity as a knife-wielding murderer exaggerates the reality of this disorder. If anything, Hitchcock intended for this film to thrill and entertain its audience, not necessarily to educate them on this particular psychological disorder. Psycho is one of the most influential films of all time. Hitchcock revolutionized plot structure, score, and cinematography, keeping audiences on the edge of their seats for over 50 years. He is the master of suspense after all. Overall, Kat and I rate Psycho 5 out of 5 Freuds and recommend another Hitchcock psychological thriller Vertigo, which portrays a character with an anxiety disorder.